For the full launch of MULTIVERSUS, those actually made some pretty big changes to the perk system, which if you didn't know, perks were a feature in MULTIVERSUS where you could select 3 perks that you can then combo with your teammate that would give you different buffs, and then of course if they're comboed with your teammate, they would give you even better buffs. But for the full release of the game, there's actually made some pretty big changes. The first one being that the 3 perk slots that you have now all have their own unique selection of perks, whereas before you could just slap any perk into any slot. Another difference is that you can only combo one, that being the first slot, the team slot, with your teammate to actually get a better perk. And in today's video, I'm basically just going to go through the 3 categories of perks, explain what they all do, and which ones are good, which ones are not so good, and which ones are useless. The 3 slots that you do have are divided into 3 categories, being Team, this is the one that you can combo with your teammate, Strong, and Standard. Within these groups, there are also 3 types of perks, that being Power and Damage, the red ones, Defensive perks, the blue ones, and then Utility perks, those are the green ones. Now that you understand how perks work, let's get into explaining and ranking them. Alright, so to start off, we're gonna do the team perks. And the first one we're gonna do here is that's Flammable Dock. This perk makes it so that if you hit a projectile on someone, then you ignite them. So Ignite makes it so that there's this little fist that's like hovering around your opponent, and then if you hit your opponent with a melee move, or basically just anything that isn't a projectile, then your move will do 3% extra damage. So usually if you play it right, Ignite just means that you do 3 extra damage. I highly recommend it. It does of course depend on your character. For example, it's maybe not so useful on someone that doesn't have projectiles, but some characters have a lot of projectiles, and on those it's actually super useful. Next up here we have Sturdy Dodger, and with Sturdy Dodger, if you or your teammate parry a projectile, then you get armor for 1 second. So if you parry a projectile, you get armor for 1 second. But usually this perk isn't that useful because you don't really want to parry all that much. You don't want to parry projectiles all that much, because you can actually put into disadvantage if you parry a projectile a lot of the time. So it does of course help with that, but generally just don't use it. It's not that useful. Then next up we have here is Stronger Than Ever. Stronger Than Ever gives your teammate, you and your teammate, armor for 2 seconds after you respawn. It's actually pretty useful. You can of course just run away from people who use this perk, but you can get some amount of use of it, but it's not all that great, but you definitely, of course, you can get some use out of it, so it's not terrible. Next up we have here is Snowball Effect. If you have the percent lead on someone, basically their percentage is higher than yours, then you will do 7% more damage. This is just really useful. It's pretty much it's pretty much always useful. Like in most games you'll play, you'll get a pretty good amount of damage out of this perk, so it's just really useful all around, and I highly recommend it. And of course if your teammate also selects this perk, then that damage is doubled. And the next perk we have here is Purest of Motivations. With Purest of Motivations, after you or your teammate is run out, you or your teammate will get 15% damage bonus, which can be pretty good, but usually I just prefer one of the other ones. It's not useless or anything like that, but it's not like crazy good, right? The next one we have here is Press the Advantage. With Press the Advantage, your opponent is above 125 damage, then you will apply weaken stacks whenever you attack them. And if your teammate also has the perk enabled, it will be 110 damage. But even so, you rarely ever get people to this high percent unless it's like Iron Giant. But even when you get people this high up in damage, getting a weaken stack or 2 on them isn't gonna make the difference of killing or not, because pretty much all characters just explode at like 80%, so there's just really no point in using this really. And then the last one we have here is Protective Momentum, which if you are running on the ground for 0.5 seconds, you get a projectile shield, which is actually, it's pretty useful, but of course you do have to run in the same direction, so you can't like dash dance or anything like that, but it can definitely be really useful in some matchups. Like I like using it with Arya against Rain Dog sometimes. You know, it has some uses in some scenarios, but it's not great or anything. So this is the tier list for the team perks, as you can see here. I really wouldn't ever use these. These have some niche scenarios, but these are really useful, especially that's Flammable Dock if you have projectiles, obviously, and then Snowball Effect is pretty much always useful and you can't go wrong with it. I actually quite like the teams tab. I think some of them, specifically these, need maybe a buff or something like that, so that it's maybe less just everyone running Snowball perk, but it's fine. It's definitely better than one of the other ones we're gonna talk about here. Hey, Editing Clouds here. I'm just gonna jump in here and say, if you are enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Thank you, bye! So now on to the strong perks. The first strong perk I'll talk about is the Troll Tactics perk. This perk, well, it has troll in the name, so as you can tell, it's not gonna be great. So what it does is it makes your taunts, yes, your emotes, have little particle effects and stuff. And when you taunt, your opponent gets enraged buff, which makes so the next attack they do applies weakened to you. So you are buffing your opponent to have a more pretty emote, basically. So it's obviously god tier, must use perk. If you don't use this perk, you will lose, obviously. Next perk up is Speed Force Assist. With this one, you receive a 5% base movement increased speed. It's obviously just all around pretty useful. It's nothing crazy, it's nothing terrible, it's just all around fine. Next one up is the Last Stand perk, which when you have 100 damage or more on you, if you hit opponent with a move, that will apply weakened. It does not apply to multi-hits, or when you do hit a multi-hit, it will only apply once, but still this perk is really strong and can lead to some crazy clutch comebacks. This is probably the second best perk in the game, or at least it's up there. It's very good. I highly recommend it. Then the next perk is Collateral Damage. Collateral Damage makes it so that whenever you do a ground bounce or wall bounce, that's at least what we call them, but basically when you knock enemies into any sort of wall or anything like that, they just take 1 extra damage. This can be very useful. Of course, it highly depends on your character. Some characters get a lot of use out of this, and some characters get literally nothing out of this. So you just need to be aware of what your character does, and then, you know, build based off of that. Next perk is the Airwalker perk. Airwalker perk is super strong. It has a lot of use cases, but let me just explain it first. So what Airwalker does is that whenever you neutral dodge or parry in the air, you will spawn a platform below you. It does remove your ability to parry in the air, but I'll cover that in a little bit. So you spawn a platform below you, letting you use all of your grounded moves in the air, which is actually really useful because it will let you do stuff like up B, and then maybe you're out of specials now, but then you can use Airwalker perk and then use a grounded up B. This really allows for some characters to get some insanely cool combos, and it like allows for one of the highest skill ceilings that we've had in Multiversus. And it's some of the coolest combos that you can find are with Airwalker. But it does come at a cost, that being 3 bars every time you use it, so that's half of your entire bar whenever you use Airwalker perk, and it also removes your ability to do air parries. So it does depend a lot on how you play the game. For example, I really like air parrying, I think it's very important, so I personally don't run Airwalker, but if you don't find yourself basically never parrying in the air, you could really consider Airwalker because it can extend your combos by a lot and give you some crazy cool combos. So I highly recommend that you research on your character how good Airwalker is for you, and then make a decision based off of that. And then the last perk in the strong category is Too Fast to Block. Too Fast to Block makes all of your dash attacks break armor. It's pretty useful. It's not great. For example, for some characters, it's completely useless. For some characters, it's really useful. It of course highly depends. For some characters, it's S tier. For example, if you're fighting a Wonder Woman with a character that has no armor breaking moves, it's super useful. But if you're some character that has a lot of armor break, it's really bad. So it really just depends. I'll put it here in A tier, and then I will also move this up here just so we have a little bit of a better looking tier list, because these two are just so good that you really, if you're not using one of these, I don't know what you're doing. Or I guess actually I should also move this up because it can be very useful on some characters. And here we are at the last slot that we have here, Static Electricity. With Static Electricity, if you move on the ground for 4 seconds, your next projectile will apply Shocked. But if you leave the ground, this restarts the timer. This perk is horrible. Frankly, it's just really not useful pretty much ever. I don't see any reason why you would run this on any character, like at all. Basically, it's just really bad. Next perk is Second Wind Beneath Your Wings. This perk makes it so that if you ring on an enemy, then you get all of your air abilities back. So if you're out doing some crazy edge guard where you use all of your resources, then you get all of those back. Of course, you only have 2 dodges in the air and 2 specials in the air, so if you use those trying to edge guard, then you might die sometimes, but if you get a kill, then you get them back with this perk. But it's not great. I don't recommend it ever. It's just not very useful. It can be used, it's not like completely useless, but it's really bad. Next perk is Puggliest. I don't really know how to say that, but this perk just increases all of your melee damage, and melee damage just means anything that isn't a projectile. It doesn't have to be anything with fists or anything like that. It just has to not be a projectile, more or less. And it's just generally all around a really useful perk. You can't really go wrong with it, and I highly recommend it. Next perk is Clear the Air. This perk makes it so that if you parry a projectile, you will then reflect it. So you send it back, and it now is your projectile, basically. Normally, if you don't have this perk and you parry a projectile, that will only destroy the projectile. Yeah, it's still not really all that great. It can be useful, but generally parrying a projectile is just never worth it. Even with this perk, I would just dodge them. So yeah, I don't really recommend it, but it can be useful in some specific matchups. The next perk we have is Armor Killer. If you have this perk on, then if you hit an enemy that is using armor, you will then make it so that they can't use armor for a little short period after you hit them. This perk is also not very good. It definitely can be used maybe more than some others, but it's still just not something I would ever see myself running, even if I'm fighting something with a lot of armor, because generally there's just better options than this. And then the last perk is Armor Crush. Armor Crush makes it so that if fully charge your attack, so let's say you're playing Superman, then if you fully charge your forward air, then this will break armor. Like, it's way more useful than Armor Killer, for example, but it's still not all that great. But of course, it can have its uses in some matchups, like all the other armor perks. But if you're gonna use an armor perk, I definitely recommend using this one, or the dash attack perk. And that was all of the standard perks. Unlike the other ones, I really think that this one, it needs a lot of changing around, because there's basically only one perk that I ever see anybody running, and it's Pugliest. Pugliest is basically the only good one here. All the other ones are super niche or super just bad. So I don't really know what they were thinking of this one, but they definitely need to do something about it. So here is the fully completed tier list with all of the perks in order of what type of perk they are. So if you're curious which ones are good, these are my opinions at least. Of course, you can have different opinions, but I think you'll be hard pressed to find anybody that completely disagrees with all of these. It's not especially subjective. Of course, some are better than others for some characters. This is just a general rule of thumb for which ones you should use. But yeah, that's the video. I hope you learned something. I know that the perks can be kind of confusing for new players, so I hope this helped you out to understand which ones are good, which ones are not good, how they even work in the first place, because I know it can be kind of confusing. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really does help me out a lot, seriously. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!